Nantucket, Massachusetts, July 4th, 2023, 11:45 p.m. The fireworks exploded in bursts of red, white, and blue over Nantucket Harbor, reflecting on the calm water. The house buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but I sat alone on the porch swing, staring at the watch on my wrist. Its gold gleamed under the faint light spilling from the patio doors, and it felt heavier than it should. Eleanor Hadley, my mother-in-law, had slipped it onto my wrist during dinner. "A welcome gift," she'd said, her smile warm and inviting. But later, when Nate stepped away to grab drinks, she leaned in close, her voice a soft murmur meant only for me. "You belong to me now," she whispered, her breath brushing against my ear. At the time, I had laughed nervously, waiting for her to say it was a joke. She didn't. Her gaze lingered, sharp and calculating, before she turned back to the table, effortlessly gliding into a conversation about vintage wines. "Annie?" Nate's voice startled me, and I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "What are you doing out here?" "I just needed some air," I said quickly, slipping the watch under my arm. He stepped onto the porch, his brow furrowed. "You sure? You've been quiet all night." Before I could respond, the screen door creaked open and Eleanor appeared. She carried a glass of wine, the light catching the pearls around her neck. "There you are," she said, her voice warm but with an edge that sent a chill down my spine. "Annie, darling, come back inside. Dessert is ready." "Coming," I murmured, standing up. As I followed Nate and Eleanor into the house, I caught her reflection in the glass door. Her lips curled into a small smile, but her eyes remained cold. The weight of the watch seemed to grow heavier with each step I took. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor's influence seeped into my life in subtle but unsettling ways. She offered to help plan our wedding, then quickly took over every detail. She arranged our honeymoon, curated my wardrobe, even suggested appropriate friends for me to meet. "Annie, let me handle it," she'd say with her disarming smile. "You're so busy." At first, I convinced myself she was just being generous. But by Thanksgiving, it became clear her generosity came with strings. That evening, as we sat at her penthouse dining table, Eleanor leaned over during a lull in the conversation. "Nate never told you about the arrangement, did he?" I blinked. "What arrangement?" She sipped her wine, her smile barely flickering. "The trust fund, the prenup. Didn't he explain how things work in this family?" My stomach dropped. "No," I said carefully. Eleanor's smile grew sharper. "Oh dear, he really should have." After dinner, I confronted Nate. He brushed it off, saying it was just legal stuff his father had set up to protect the family business. But his nonchalance didn't ease the knot of unease tightening in my chest. By Christmas, Eleanor's hold on me had tightened further. She dictated everything from our holiday itinerary to the gifts we exchanged. When I suggested spending Christmas morning at our apartment, she laughed. "Darling, Hadleys don't do small holidays," she said, her tone light but final. I was starting to feel like a guest in my own life. On New Year's Eve, Eleanor invited us to a black tie gala at the Waldorf Astoria. As we mingled with her influential friends, she pulled me aside. "You've done well so far," she said, her tone almost approving. "Excuse me?" "You've integrated into the family seamlessly," she said. "But remember, appearances matter. People are watching." Her words lingered, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. A few weeks later, the unease turned into full-blown alarm. Eleanor sent a chest of family heirlooms to our apartment. Inside, I found a journal, leather-bound and filled with handwritten notes about Nate's ex-fiancées. June 2017, Elizabeth, too ambitious, tried to take control, ended poorly. October 2019, Clarissa, lacked refinement, couldn't keep up, cut ties swiftly. At the bottom of the last page was my name. June 2023, Annabelle, promising but untested, requires grooming. Watch closely. I confronted Nate, throwing the journal onto the coffee table. "What is this?" He sighed. "Where did you find that?" It doesn't matter, I snapped. Your mom has been spying on me. On all of us. She's protective, he said weakly. This isn't protection, I said. This is psychotic. Nate rubbed his temples. Annie, you're overreacting. No, Nate, I said firmly. Your mom is dangerous. The next morning, Eleanor invited me to lunch. At the table, she placed a thick envelope in front of me. I like to know everything about the people in my life, she said casually. Inside the envelope were financial records, emails, even photographs of me from years before I met Nate. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. It's how I keep things manageable, she said, her smile unflinching. You're part of something bigger now, a legacy. That requires sacrifices. What sacrifices? I whispered. Her gaze hardened. Don't make me regret choosing you. The words struck me like a slap. For the first time, I saw Eleanor for what she truly was. A puppet master pulling strings, willing to destroy anyone who didn't fall in line. But I wasn't going to let her control me. As I left the table, my mind was already racing. Eleanor Hadley might have built her empire on power and manipulation, but I was going to tear it down, starting with her secrets. Manhattan, New York, February 14th, 2024, 8:15 p.m. Valentine's Day dinner was meant to be romantic, a reprieve from the tension that had settled into my marriage. Nate had reserved a table at an upscale French restaurant downtown. The candlelight glinted off the gold watch still ticking on my wrist, a constant reminder of Eleanor's omnipresence in my life. I'm glad we're doing this, Nate said, his tone light as he poured me a glass of wine. We needed a night to ourselves. I smiled weakly, swirling the wine in my glass. Yeah, we did. But the mood shattered when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and sighed. It's Mom. She probably just wants to check in. My stomach turned. It's Valentine's Day. Can't she give us one night? You know how she is, Nate said, brushing it off. I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at the flickering candle between us, wondering how long I could keep pretending everything was fine. A week later, Eleanor called me directly, something she rarely did. Annie, darling, she said, her voice unnervingly cheerful. I need you to come by the penthouse this afternoon. It's important. I have plans, I lied. Cancel them, she said, her tone sharpening. This can't wait. Reluctantly, I went. When I arrived, Eleanor was sitting in her sun-drenched living room, flipping through a glossy portfolio. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat stiffly, watching as she slid the portfolio across the table. Inside were photos of me and Nate, smiling at parties, cutting our wedding cake, even walking hand in hand through Central Park. What is this? I asked. A proposal, she said, her voice smooth. I've arranged for a feature in Modern Legacy. They want to showcase you and Nate as the perfect couple. I blinked at her. You're kidding, right? Eleanor's smile didn't falter. Why would I be? You're part of the Hadley family now. This is the kind of exposure that benefits us all. I'm not comfortable with this, I said firmly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the warmth in her expression vanishing. Annie, I'm not asking. I'm telling. My hands clenched in my lap. You don't control me, Eleanor. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Oh, darling, I already do. You just haven't realized it yet. That night, I told Nate about the confrontation. She's out of line, I said, pacing the living room. This has gone too far. Nate rubbed the back of his neck. I'll talk to her. You've said that before, I shot back. It doesn't change anything. What do you want me to do, Annie? He snapped. She's my mother. I stopped pacing, staring at him. I want you to choose me, Nate. For once, I want you to stand up to her. He looked away, and I knew the answer before he spoke. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor's influence grew more suffocating. She began showing up unannounced, offering unsolicited advice about everything from our finances to my wardrobe. You're spending too much on groceries, she said one afternoon, rifling through my receipts. And this, she added, holding up a pair of shoes, is a waste of money. Eleanor, you can't just go through my things, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm only trying to help, she said with a saccharine smile. But her help felt more like surveillance. The final straw came in March, when I received a call from my boss. Annie, can we talk? He asked, his tone unusually serious. Of course, I said, stepping into a conference room. There's been some concern about your performance, he began. Concern? I echoed, stunned. He nodded. Someone contacted us anonymously, claiming you've been distracted and unprofessional. They provided examples. My heart sank. Examples? Emails, personal texts, things that shouldn't be part of your workday, he said carefully. I left the office in a daze, my mind racing. There was only one person who could have orchestrated this, Eleanor. That evening, I confronted her at the penthouse. How dare you interfere with my job? I demanded, storming into the living room. Eleanor looked up from her book, her expression calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, I snapped. You've been meddling in my life since the day I married Nate. But this is too far. She set her book down, her eyes cold. I've done nothing but protect you, Annabelle. If you're incapable of appreciating that, perhaps you're not cut out for this family after all. I don't need your protection, I said through gritted teeth. Eleanor stood, her presence towering despite her petite frame. You have no idea what you're saying, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Do you think you'd be here without me? Do you think Nate would be where he is without my guidance? I stared at her, realization dawning. You don't care about Nate. Or me. You care about control? Her smile returned, sharp as a knife. Control is how legacies are built, darling. Shaken, I returned home to find Nate waiting for me. We need to talk, he said, his face pale. What now? I asked, exhausted. It's about Mom, he said, handing me a folder. Inside were documents, emails, financial records, even surveillance photos. She's been spying on us, Nate admitted. I found this in her study. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want to believe it, he said. But after what she did to your job, I can't ignore it anymore. I looked at him, my anger giving way to determination. We have to stop her. How? He asked. I thought of the watch on my wrist, its ticking suddenly deafening. By beating her at her own game. Manhattan, New York, March 10th, 2024, 10:45 p.m. Nate sat across from me at the dining table, the folder of Eleanor's secrets spread between us like a forbidden book. Each document was a thread in the intricate web sheet woven around us. Financial leverage, private correspondences, and even records of Nate's childhood counseling sessions. She's been planning this for years, I said, my voice shaking. Every move we've made, she's controlled it. Nate nodded, guilt etched into his face. I didn't realize how far it had gone. I thought she just wanted to help. Help? I scoffed. This isn't help, Nate. It's manipulation. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. So, what do we do? Confront her? Cut her off? I shook my head. She's too powerful to confront directly. If we try, she'll just bury us. Then what? I hesitated, the idea forming in my mind like a storm cloud. We gather evidence. We expose her. If we can prove what she's done, we can stop her. Nate's eyes widened. Expose her? Do you know what you're saying? She's already sabotaged my career. Nate, I said, my voice rising. What's next? Our marriage? Our future? He didn't argue. Instead, he reached for my hand. Okay, let's do it. The next few weeks were a blur of late-night strategy sessions and covert operations. Nate and I became secret investigators in our own home, searching for cracks in Eleanor's carefully constructed facade. Nate planted a small recording device in her study during one of her weekly charity board meetings. It was risky, but it paid off. One night, he handed me a USB drive. You need to hear this, he said, his face pale. I plugged it into my laptop, and Eleanor's voice filled the room. Annabelle is unstable, she said, her tone calm and deliberate. She's a liability. If she becomes too much of a problem, we'll have to cut her loose. My blood ran cold. Cut her loose, came another voice, Peter's. She's an outsider, Eleanor replied. She doesn't belong in this family, and she never will. That recording was the turning point. I realized Eleanor wasn't just meddling. She was orchestrating my downfall. I decided to fight back. Manhattan, New York, March 25, 2024, 3 p.m. Eleanor's annual charity gala was the perfect setting for our plan. The event was a spectacle, with New York's elite gathered in a glittering ballroom to sip champagne and bid on extravagant auction items. Nate and I arrived together, our smiles fixed in place. But beneath the surface, I was a live wire, ready to explode. Eleanor greeted us at the entrance, her smile as polished as her diamond necklace. "There you are," she said, air-kissing my cheek. I was starting to worry. "We wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. Her eyes flicked to Nate. "Darling, you look tired. Have you been working too hard?" "Just busy," he replied, his tone neutral. As Eleanor turned to greet another guest, I whispered to Nate, "Are you sure everything's in place?" He nodded. "Peter's already set up in the back. The recording will play on cue." I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. This had to work. As the evening progressed, Eleanor took the stage to deliver her speech. She was magnetic, her words weaving a narrative of generosity and leadership. The audience hung on her every word. "Tonight, we celebrate the strength of our community," she said, her voice commanding. "Together, we can build a brighter future." The applause was thunderous, but as the clapping subsided, the ballroom filled with an unfamiliar sound. Eleanor's voice, sharp and cold. "Annabelle is unstable. She's a liability. If she becomes too much of a problem, we'll have to cut her loose." The crowd froze. Heads turned, whispers spreading like wildfire. Eleanor's face went pale. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The recording continued. "She's an outsider. She doesn't belong in this family, and she never will." "Turn it off," Eleanor shouted, her composure cracking. But it was too late. The damage was done. Aftermath, the fallout was immediate. The guests, many of whom had long admired Eleanor, looked at her with new eyes. The whispers grew louder, accusations and doubts swirling around the room. Peter, who had been reluctant to side with us at first, stepped forward. "It's true," he said, his voice steady. "Eleanor's been controlling all of us for years. This recording is just the tip of the iceberg." Eleanor glared at him, her mask slipping entirely. "You ungrateful little..." But Peter didn't back down. "I've seen what you've done to Nate. To Annabelle. Enough is enough." That night marked the beginning of Eleanor's downfall. The recording sparked an investigation into her business practices, revealing a history of unethical behavior and manipulation. For the first time, Nate and I felt free. As we stood on the balcony of our apartment, watching the city lights twinkle, I turned to Nate. "Do you think she'll ever stop?" He shook his head. "No, but she doesn't have the power she used to." I looked at the gold watch still ticking on my wrist. It was just a trinket now, a reminder of how far I'd come. "We took our lives back," I said softly. Nate wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. "We did." Manhattan, New York, March 26, 2024, 9 a.m., the morning after Eleanor's public humiliation, the Hadley penthouse sat shrouded in an eerie silence. I imagined Eleanor pacing the marble floors, her mind racing as she planned her next move. Despite the chaos we'd unleashed, I knew she wouldn't give up without a fight. Nate and I sat at our kitchen table, the city's noise filtering in through the open window. The headlines had already begun trickling in: matriarch manipulation, scandal erupts at Hadley Gala, secrets exposed, power, control, and the fall of Eleanor Hadley. I scrolled through the articles, my stomach knotting tighter with each word. "She's going to retaliate," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She can't," Nate replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Not after last night. You don't know her like I do." I said. She always finds a way. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. You've made a grave mistake, Eleanor's voice hissed through the line. I didn't make you say those things, I shot back. You did that all on your own. You think you've won, she snarled. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The line went dead, but her words echoed in my mind. Manhattan, New York, April 1st, 2024, 11:15 a.m. A week passed, and the fallout only grew. Eleanor's name was removed from several charity boards, and whispers of internal investigations at her company began to circulate. Nate and I tried to move on, but the tension lingered. One evening, Peter showed up unannounced. His usually confident demeanor was replaced by an air of nervousness. We need to talk, he said, stepping inside. What's wrong? Nate asked, concerned. It's Mom, Peter began, running a hand through his hair. She's digging. Digging for what? I asked. Anything she can use against you, Peter said, his voice grim. She's desperate. She won't find anything, Nate said firmly. Peter hesitated. She might not need to. She's already called in favors, powerful ones. My heart sank. Eleanor's reach was vast, and her connections ran deep. The unexpected ally. A few days later, I received a surprise email. The sender was Lorraine Hadley, Eleanor's estranged sister. Nate had mentioned her once, describing a family feud that had left her exiled from the Hadley dynasty decades earlier. The email was brief. I know what Eleanor is capable of. If you're ready to fight back, meet me. We met Lorraine at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the glittering Manhattan world Eleanor controlled. She was older than Eleanor, with sharp features softened by time and a kind, knowing smile. Annabelle, she said, shaking my hand firmly. I've been waiting for this moment. For what? I asked, confused. For someone to stand up to my sister, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. What happened between you two? Nate asked. Lorraine sighed. Eleanor has always been calculating. When our father passed, she manipulated her way into controlling the family estate, cutting me out entirely. She thrives on power, and she'll destroy anyone who threatens it. Why are you helping us? I asked. She smiled faintly. Because it's about time someone took her down. Lorraine provided us with a treasure trove of information, financial records, personal letters, and even a copy of their father's will, which revealed that Eleanor had falsified documents to gain control of the family fortune. This could ruin her, I said, flipping through the files. That's the idea, Lorraine replied. The Setback, Manhattan, New York, April 15th, 2024, 3:45 p.m. With Lorraine's help, Nate and I began preparing to expose Eleanor's crimes. But just as we were making progress, she struck back. Nate's bank accounts were frozen without warning. My employer called to inform me that I was being investigated for fraud, a claim entirely fabricated but difficult to disprove without a fight. She's trying to destroy us, Nate said, pacing the living room. Let her try, I said, my resolve hardening. We're not backing down. The confrontation, Hadley Penthouse, April 20th, 2024, 8 p.m. That evening. We decided to confront Eleanor directly. With Lorraine's evidence in hand, Nate and I arrived at the penthouse, our nerves steeled for the battle ahead. Eleanor greeted us with her usual poise, but there was an edge to her smile. I wasn't expecting company, she said, closing the door behind us. We need to talk, Nate said firmly. She gestured to the sitting room, her movements deliberate. By all means. As we laid the evidence before her, Eleanor's expression remained unreadable. But when Lorraine entered the room, her composure cracked. You, Eleanor spat, rising to her feet. Hello, sister, Lorraine said, her voice dripping with mockery. It's been too long. This is absurd, Eleanor said, turning to us. You're taking her word over mine? She's a bitter old woman who's been trying to ruin me for years. You ruined yourself, Lorraine shot back. Eleanor's eyes darted to the documents spread on the table. These prove nothing. They prove enough, Nate said. For the first time, Eleanor seemed genuinely rattled. She reached for the phone on the table, but Lorraine stopped her. "Don't bother," Lorraine said. "The board of directors already has copies. Your reign is over." The collapse over the following weeks, Eleanor's empire crumbled. The board of her company voted to remove her as CEO. Investigations revealed years of fraud and manipulation, leaving her reputation in shreds. For the first time, Nate and I felt free. Epilogue, Brooklyn, New York, May 10th, 2024, 7:30 p.m. We moved to Brooklyn, far from the shadows of Eleanor's control. Lorraine became a surprising ally, helping us rebuild what Eleanor had tried to destroy. One evening, as we sat on our small balcony overlooking the city, Nate took my hand. "We did it," he said, his voice soft. "We did," I replied, glancing at the gold watch on my wrist. It no longer felt heavy. Eleanor's control had been an illusion, a house of cards that we had finally blown down. Brooklyn, New York, May 15th, 2024, 9 a.m. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of our modest Brooklyn apartment, a stark contrast to the cold marble and polished perfection of Eleanor's penthouse. For the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest lift, the oppressive grip of Eleanor's control finally gone. Lorraine's evidence had dismantled Eleanor's empire piece by piece. Headlines continued to pour in. Eleanor Hadley removed as CEO amid scandal, Hadley dynasty in turmoil after fraud allegations. Still, even with her power stripped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor wasn't done. She was wounded, yes, but she was also dangerous. Nate entered the kitchen, holding his phone. "She called me," he said, his voice tight. I froze. "What did she say?" "She wants to meet," he replied. "Why?" He shook his head. "I don't know, but I think we should go." I stared at him, torn between fear and curiosity. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "It's time to end this. For good." Hadley Penthouse, May 16th, 2024, 7 p.m. The penthouse felt different when we walked in. Emptier, colder. The once bustling space was quiet, the staff noticeably absent. Eleanor sat alone in the living room, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "I suppose you've come to gloat," she said, her voice clipped. "We came to understand," Nate said, his tone calm but firm. "Why, Mom? Why did you do all of this?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "You wouldn't understand." "Try us," I said, stepping forward. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You think you've won, don't you? But you don't see the bigger picture. Everything I did was for this family, for you, Nate. To protect our legacy." "Protect it?" Nate snapped. "You destroyed it." "I preserved it," she countered, her voice rising. "You think you can survive in this world without power? Without control? You're naive." "No," Nate said, his voice steady. "We're free." Eleanor's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of defeat. It was something darker. "You think freedom is a gift," she said, "but it's a burden, one you're not ready for." I shivered at her words, but Nate stood his ground. "We don't need you to decide our lives anymore," he said firmly. For a moment, Eleanor's mask slipped, revealing a flash of desperation. "You'll regret this," she said softly. "When the world turns on you, don't expect me to save you." "We don't need saving," I said, taking Nate's hand. "Not from you." The closure that was the last time we saw Eleanor in person. In the weeks that followed, she retreated from the public eye, her influence reduced to whispers in the corners of elite circles. The Hadley name, once synonymous with power, now carried the weight of scandal. Lorraine, meanwhile, had reemerged as a quiet but effective presence in the family's business, using her newfound leverage to undo some of Eleanor's damage. "You've given us a chance to rebuild," Lorraine said during one of our meetings. "I won't squander it." Brooklyn, New York, July 4th, 2024, 9 p.m. 1 year after the night Eleanor first placed the gold watch on my wrist, Nate and I stood on our balcony, watching fireworks light up the Brooklyn sky. The oppressive weight of her control had lifted, leaving room for something new to grow, something real. "We did it," Nate said, wrapping his arm around me. I smiled, leaning into him. We did. The gold watch still ticked on my wrist, but it no longer felt like a shackle. It was a reminder of how far we'd come, and how much we had left to build together. As the final bursts of fireworks painted the night sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time, our lives were our own. Brooklyn, New York, September 10th, 2024, 8 a.m. Life after Eleanor's downfall was quieter, but the echoes of her influence still lingered. Nate and I had started rebuilding our lives, brick by brick, free from her shadow. Yet, there were moments when the past threatened to resurface. Old habits, lingering doubts, the fear that she might somehow find a way back into our lives. I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of mail. Most of it was mundane, bills, advertisements, but one envelope stood out. It was handwritten, the script elegant and unmistakably familiar. What is it? Nate asked, walking in with a mug of coffee. I held up the envelope. It's from her. His jaw tightened. Eleanor? I nodded, opening it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. Annabelle, you may have thought you won, but victory is never final. A lesson you'll learn soon enough. Eleanor, my heart sank. What does this mean? I asked, handing the letter to Nate. He read it, his expression hardening. It means she's not done. Manhattan, New York, September 15th, 2024, 2 p.m. Lorraine agreed to meet us at a quiet cafe near her office. Since Eleanor's fall, she had taken on a more active role in managing what remained of the Hadley estate, carefully untangling the mess her sister had left behind. When we showed her the letter, her face darkened. Typical Eleanor, she said, setting it down. Do you think she's planning something? Nate asked. She always is, Lorraine replied. But her resources are limited now. She doesn't have the same power she once wielded. That doesn't mean she can't hurt us, I said. Lorraine sighed. I'll look into it. If she's making moves, I'll find out. A sudden twist the next day, Lorraine called. We need to talk. Now. Nate and I rushed to her office, where she met us with a grim expression. I've been going through some of Eleanor's old financial records, she began, motioning for us to sit. She's been funneling money into an offshore account. Quietly, but steadily. What for? Nate asked. I'm not sure yet, Lorraine admitted, but it's substantial. Enough to suggest she's planning something big. My stomach churned. Can we stop her? We can try, Lorraine said, but Eleanor's always been 2 steps ahead. Whatever she's planning, she's likely already in motion. Brooklyn, New York, September 20th, 2024, 7:30 p.m. that evening, as Nate and I sat on the couch, poring over the documents Lorraine had given us. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. My hands shook as I opened my laptop. In my inbox was an email with the subject line, Truth about the Hadleys. The message contained a link to an anonymous blog. Clicking on it revealed a series of posts detailing Eleanor's rise to power, complete with incriminating evidence that hadn't been part of her public downfall. There were allegations of bribery, blackmail, and even ties to illegal offshore accounts. This is it, I said, my voice trembling. This could destroy her for good. Nate leaned over, reading the screen. But who sent it? Does it matter? I asked. If this gets out, she's finished. It matters, he said, frowning. If it's a trap, we could be walking right into it. The Confrontation Hadley Penthouse, September 25th, 2024, 6 p.m. Unable to shake the feeling that the blog was a setup, Nate and I decided to confront Eleanor one final time. Lorraine urged caution, but we needed answers. Eleanor greeted us at the door, her expression unreadable. This is a surprise, she said, stepping aside to let us in. You know why we're here, Nate said, his tone cold. Do I? She asked, arching an eyebrow. We know about the offshore accounts, I said, my voice steady. And the blog. Someone's exposing you, Eleanor. Her smile flickered, just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. And you assume I care? You should, Nate said. It's only a matter of time before everything comes crashing down. Eleanor walked to the bar, pouring herself a glass of wine. You're both so naive, she said, swirling the glass. Do you think this is about me? This is about survival, yours and mine. Survival? I repeated. Do you know what happens to people who defy the Hadley name? She asked, her voice sharp. The world doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. You're deflecting, Nate said. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Am I? The revelation before we could respond. Eleanor set her glass down and leaned forward. Do you want to know the truth? About what? I asked cautiously. About the blog. The accounts. All of it, she said, her voice low. Tell us, Nate demanded. Eleanor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The blog wasn't my doing. It was Lorraine's. What? Nate and I said in unison. She's been waiting for years to destroy me, Eleanor continued. And now, she's finally found her chance. That doesn't make sense, I said. Doesn't it? Eleanor replied. Think about it. Who benefits most from my downfall? Her words planted a seed of doubt, one I couldn't shake. The aftermath back at home, Nate and I discussed Eleanor's claim. Could Lorraine have orchestrated everything? Or was this another of Eleanor's mind games? The truth, it seemed, was as elusive as ever. In the weeks that followed, the blog posts gained traction, sparking renewed investigations into the Hadley family. Eleanor remained defiant, while Lorraine distanced herself from the chaos. For Nate and me, the lesson was clear. Freedom came at a price. But despite the uncertainty, we clung to each other, determined to build a life untethered from the Hadley legacy. As the world around us shifted, the gold watch on my wrist ticked steadily, a reminder of where we'd been and how far we'd come.